Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rinnie, and today we're getting mindful about our relationships, and in particular, we're going to focus on non-monogamous relationships. And really excited to bring this to you today because it's not something that is the usual when we talk about relationships, particularly in our lives today. So joining me for today's discussion is an expert in this topic. It's Paige Bond from Florida, USA. How are you going, Paige?
Hey, how's it going? It's going good for me.
Oh, it's really good. I'm excited about this episode. I was fortunate to sit down with you on your podcast, the Stubborn Love podcast, and have a good chat about relationships, and particularly the relationships with ourselves, which is also a different topic in the relationship space. It's often it's us and somebody else, but to have that improved relationship with ourselves, that was a really cool conversation. So I'm excited to bring you over and share your expertise with my audience. Now, to introduce you, you're a relational psychotherapist, you're a loving partner as well, and you're a non-monogamy coach. So before we get started, can you talk to us about what non-monogamy coaching is and how you got into it?
Yeah, so non-monogamy coaching is essentially me positioning myself as someone who can give expert advice and guidance when it comes to navigating non-monogamy. And that can go over so many different ways because navigating non-monogamy can sometimes mean actually already being in the relationship. It can be thinking about wanting to start a non-monogamous relationship, or it could even be, helping someone recover from the aftermath of non-monogamy going wrong or deciding if you want to be non-monogamous. So there's a lot of different areas to go within non-monogamy coaching, but I love tackling all that I can.
Well, and how did you get into this field?
Yeah, so I got into this field starting when I was really young. I got curious about relationships after my parents divorced. I got so curious that I wanted to go into the field of psychology and ended up getting a master's degree in marriage, couples, and family therapy. After that, I started a private practice for myself, and I noticed many of the relationship issues coming in at the very beginning all had something to do with non monogamy. And I was like, okay, I don't know enough about this particular relationship dynamic because grad school didn't prepare me for it. So I decided to educate myself. I would read books, I would hop on a bunch of different podcasts and see what people out there were talking about. I would take trainings because there's not so much information out there for how to navigate non-monogamy, at least from outside of, people's personal experience. So in the world of, clinical therapy, it's something that definitely is not so much talked about in like grad school and things like that.
It's interesting you say that because so much of my social work degree was things that I didn't learn that I experienced when I was out of the degree. And I hear this a lot with therapists is that we learn a lot in university or college, but then it so often doesn't apply in the big wide world, and particularly the big wide world of private practice when we go into it. So I'm glad I'm not the only person who has experienced that and hearing that experience as well. And as we said at the top of the show, it's not something that we easily come across or is something that I don't think is broadcast very much in our media or social media. It's something that is a bit taboo in a lot of areas as well. Now, we're throwing out some big words here and they're very hard to say. So I was hoping you could just define for us the difference between monogamy and non-monogamy, because some people might have not heard of this term before.
For sure. And I like to view monogamy versus non-monogamy on a spectrum. So if you can imagine like a very long line with both of those at the other end of them, imagining monogamy is fidelity between two people. Usually it's emotional and sexual fidelity. And so those are just coupled up as your couple. You think about, when people get married or when people are in relationship. Our default, at least from societal program, is that a couple or a relationship is monogamous. So we think of two people in monogamy. And then you can branch out on that spectrum, going more and more toward the other side of non monogamy. And so that could be maybe inviting in different fantasies of either being in your head with like erotica, dreaming. It can be virtual reality. You can start to move along the spectrum by involving maybe cam girls or, sex work into your monogamous relationship, but kind of monogamish. So ISH instead of monogamous. And then moving further along into the spectrum, actually expanding into maybe physical interactions with people or emotional interactions with people. And so a lot of times when people think of non monogamy, it's where it's more than two people involved. So you can think of, an open relationship where partners have extra partners, or you can think of in polyamory where it means many love. You are loving and having an emotional relationship with more than one partner at a time. So there's a whole spectrum of it, and I could probably spend hours talking about just this question, but there's a shortened version right there.
It sounds like a reality TV show in itself. You've got the makings for, I guess, some of the topics that would come into your private practice as well and expand your horizon would be just phenomenal. As you said, it's a spectrum. It's not no black and white. There's a lot of grey, a lot of rainbow colour in the middle. It's very diverse. And so I guess when you're thinking about your private practice, can you go through a bit about, maybe what are some of the key issues that people come into your private practice with in terms of non-monogamous relationships?
Yeah, I would say some of the biggest key issues when people come to my practice and they're practicing non monogamy and maybe something goes wrong, it can likely be due to a broken agreement or boundary violation where maybe someone made an agreement, but they didn't really want to agree with it. And so they kind of went along with it. And I work with a lot of people pleasers. And so this happens a lot. We make agreements that we don't really fully agree with, we're not fully on board with. And so they easily break when that happens if we don't believe in something. And so a lot of times what happens in my practice is we're working on repairing trust and rebuilding that, and then working towards communication and finding different ways where they can actually be transparent with each other in expressing their needs and what their vision of the relationship is.
Yeah, what are some of those agreements? Is that like the agreement to even do this thing in the first place, or is it other types of agreements as well?
Yeah, it can be. And so I want to also talk about how in non monogamy, I like to use the phrase consensual non monogamy at times just to really iterate that this is something that you are consenting to. If you are having an open relationship or going out and meeting other people, that can be considered cheating when your partner doesn't agree to have that as part of the relationship. So I'd like to put that there as this is a consensual act. When something happens and they're kind of like going along with it, but maybe they're going along with it out of fear that the relationship will end, or maybe their partner says, I'll leave you if you don't open the relationship, or I'm not going to have sex with you anymore if we don't go to the swingers club. That's called coercion, and that is not consensual non monogamy. And so that can actually be another thing that ends up people in my office because they're really having a hard time navigating maybe what they truly want or even coming up with the words of how to express themselves.
As you're saying that, the coercion that falls into that family and domestic violence domain, is that a big issue in your practice, or are pretty much all the people that come in consensual?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, a good majority, the partners are usually at least on board with the idea or on board with exploring the idea. However, I do have, like, in that population of clients that I do see, they likely have had other past relationships where they have tried non monogamy with a prior partner, and coercion was a factor in it. And so that can bring a lot of trust and trauma issues to the current relationship that I'm working with in the office. And so, triggers can happen really easily. Jealousy and insecurity can go haywire, especially when there might have been a recent trust incident within the current relationship we're working with.
In terms of jealousy, like how does that play out in the work that you're doing with couples? Or, more than couples?
Yeah. So I like to view jealousy just as any other emotion. And, it's kind of interesting. The topic of jealousy, some people say that, oh, if you're polyamorous, you shouldn't be jealous. Or they, on the other end of that, also say, oh, I could never do non monogamy because I would just be too jealous. And I have arguments for both those sides. One, if you're monogamous, you can still be jealous. Jealousy happens to every single person, no matter what relationship structure you're in. And then on the other side of that, if you are practicing non monogamy, you are totally allowed and valid in feeling jealous. So I like to view jealousy just as a normal human emotion. And really, it's a signal about us identifying that there's a need missing in the relationship that's not being communicated or that's not being tended to, at least.
I guess this would lead into conflict. And what's some of the types of conflicts you see in people trying to address whatever issue they're going through?
Yeah. I mean, one of the most popular ones that kind of happens in my office is that maybe one partner is finally going out and starting to date other people. And the partner who is left at home, if they're nesting partners and living together, they are really struggling with that and they get jealous. They start making comparisons about themselves to their partner's date, which we can call a metamor. So a metamor is your partner's partner. And so that is something that can get really wrapped up and put people in a really big shame spiral. And it can happen in two ways. It can be played out in where the person back at home can either stuff their feelings inside and try their best not to let their partner know, or they become big, kind of like a big thunderstorm, and show just world disaster to their partner and how it's affecting them. So it happens in two ways, where you'll see someone either really anxious from the jealousy, or they'll become really avoidant and start withdrawing from the relationship.
I was going to talk about anxiety and relationship anxiety in particular. How does that play out in the individual, but also in the, can I say trio? Is it three? Is it? I want to say couple. That's just where my automatic brain goes to. But like, talk us through relationship anxiety in this group of people.
Yeah. So, relationship anxiety, for the person experiencing it, they're going to really be having trouble with focusing so much on the relationship and what's happening in the relationship. And so they're kind of zeroing in on every little reaction that their partner might give them and over analyzing it and taking it into the negative. So they're thinking worst case scenario pretty constantly, and then doing a lot of like fear and acting. And so I'll say that, like, I'm the anxious and person struggling with relationship anxiety, and my partner's going out on a date. So what I would be doing is, I noticed that they didn't, wink at me when they passed me by in the hallway. They must like not want to be in a relationship with me anymore. They must really enjoy hanging out with their other partner way more than me. I am not enough. Those are some of the thoughts that really start making that anxious person spiral even more. And so in the relationship, how it plays out, like I said, it could be someone who's actually enacting on the anxiety. And so their partner's going to know about it. It is right there in front of you. And so it could end up in yelling. It could end up in being really contemptuous towards their partner and being critical and really fighting in a way and arguing in a way that doesn't really feel like them anymore. These are common also symptoms of post-traumatic stress and can be exacerbated, especially if there's been a betrayal, especially a recent betrayal that has happened between the two. And so depending on that and how equipped the other partner receiving that is, they can either lean in and soothe the anxiety of the partner. But oftentimes, the people that come to my office, they don't know how to do that. And so they start distancing themselves from that because that's the only way they know how to feel safe again.
I guess you're not the client, but can you imagine, like, or give us some details of maybe some of the anxieties of clients coming into therapy to talk about this as well?
Yeah, I would say a huge anxiety about it is, am I allowed to talk about this? Will I be chastised for thinking differently than the societal norm? Sometimes it can be hard to find an affirming therapist who is knowledgeable about polyamorous relationships, about navigating these specific dynamics. And a lot of damage can be done when they don't have that knowledge. I've had clients hop into my office before saying they've had prior therapists really just tell them to leave the non monogamous relationship just because that was like the therapist's only solution for them. And a lot of times what I find, it's not non-monogamy, it's not polyamory, it's not swinging that's the problem. It's how the two people are interacting and treating each other and managing their conflict, or also not being on the same page of what they share for the vision of their relationship. That's the problem. It's not non-monogamy. If it wasn't non-monogamy, it would be a partner's hobby, it would be a partner's career, it would be the kids, whatever it is. So I really like to let people know that talking about non monogamy, kink, just anything around that area is safe in my office.
Is it quite a common thing? Like, how full are your books? Are they overflowing? Are there other therapists like you as well?
Yes, there are other therapists like me, and I frequently am trying to add more and more to my own network so I can connect other people who I may not be able to see with them. And I would like to preface this by saying, non monogamy is a lot more common than we think. We don't think of it as something that is happening so often, but people keep it on the hush hush due to a lot of stigma, judgment, or even backlash from their employer or legal backlash. And so, if you think 1 in 5 people have at least experienced and tried some sort of non monogamy, and that's
Wow.
20% of people. This was US and Canada, so I don't know how it is, worldwide, but 20%. If you think about that and go into a restaurant, chances are quite a few of those people have at least tried or are currently in a non monogamous dynamic.
Do you think that's because it's more natural for humans to do that? Or, like, where do you think that comes from?
Hmm. It comes from all sorts of things. I think it comes from one part being a curiosity to explore, because it really can be a freeing way for people to really come into their own identity, their own sexuality, and discover more parts of themselves that they might not have been able to before because of the shame that can come along with it or the limitations of, monogamy. Another part that I like to use as like my most popular argument for non-monogamy is, what if you are a couple and you're monogamous, but you later on find out one of the partners realizes that they are not able to be in a relationship because they find out that their sexual identity has expanded. Maybe they desire having sex with a different gender. Maybe they desire having sex with multiple people. And so that, I think, is like one of the most beautiful things that people can do, is just explore another part of themselves to help them grow and become more authentic to them.
I was interested in that, like the evolution of sexuality or expression as well. Do you see any trends between, is it younger people? Is it older people that are coming into your office and getting help? Where do you see the trends in terms of ages, genders, sexuality? Where does that sit with you?
It's actually might be surprising, but the age range is really all across the board. I work and focus a lot of my practice on millennials, but I see people who are older than that or even sometimes younger than that. As far as other aspects, I mean, demographics really don't play a role. Like, there's not a certain gender or race or anything. It doesn't really discriminate. I see all kinds of people in my practice.
Millennials, I thought maybe the older generations in my head would be like more prevalent, but millennials, look, we seem to be a generation of people pioneering a whole bunch of things from tech to monogamy and non-monogamy and all sorts of things. Like, yeah, it's really interesting to hear millennials are the ones that you focus on. Why is that? What do you purposely choose to target millennials, or it's just naturally happening?
I think for the most part, for just who I am as a therapist, my vibes really well with millennials. And sometimes I'll be able to get some older souls who really get maybe my humor or the catchphrases I might use or just the type of things that influences me. So it really depends, but I really connect a lot with the age range that I'm part of, but definitely have a lot of fun working with the ones outside of those bounds too.
I'm the same. Like as a therapist, we all have our niches, and mine is that millennial age. I guess it's easier for me to relate to those. For the younger ones that I work with, it's a bit more challenging as this 40-year-old dad that comes in and talks to a teenager about mental health or whatever it is. So I can appreciate that, and a lot of therapists out there can appreciate that too. I want to switch it up a little bit now and kind of walk through maybe a process of someone who's thinking about exploring an open relationship with their partner and they've never done it before, or maybe they've heard of it, maybe they've tried it, but they're really worried about what's going to happen. Before we get to there, like what we're talking about, is this what this concept of an open relationship is, having more than one partner? And if so, like how do they start broaching this topic?
Yeah, so you're right on target. I mean, that is non-monogamy, having a more open relationship outside of just two people. And so, how do we get started with that is we start doing a little bit of research. And that could be meaning, Googling, asking friends, asking family, diving into books or podcasts that touch on that topic. And you can kind of test the waters with the partner that you're thinking about bringing this up to. You could maybe mention this to them in a way of like, oh, I found this podcast. I thought it was really interesting. This is for how you'll be able to gauge maybe what the reaction could be when or if you might actually want to move through and start opening this as a discussion with them. And so you could mention a certain resource and see what the reaction is. If it's, oh, okay, I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, I'll take a listen to that too. And then maybe talk about what you both learned listening to the podcast. If the reaction is more of, "Oh, no way, I could never," or, "Oh, I don't think that's cool." If you're getting more of a negative reaction towards the idea of opening up, that doesn't mean that your relationship is necessarily in trouble. This just means this is giving you kind of a gauge of how open-minded your partner might be towards that and how much more work you might need to do on really good communication to them when and if you want to bring that up. And then maybe also think about seeing a professional like a non monogamy coach or specifically a couples therapist that is affirming and helpful in talking about these particular topics.
Yeah, I was interested, like, what happens if their partner says flat out, no, this is just not, I'm not interested in this? How do they continue if their relationship, if they're really just excited to explore this? How do they navigate that? Have you got any tips?
Yeah, and that can happen, right? People can be really quick to just say no to things. And more often than not, it's an automatic reaction. It's without a lot of thought behind it. And so, if someone gives you that kind of no, I would get curious in a really empathic and compassionate way. Actually, try to understand your partner. I'm not saying this to try to manipulate them or change their mind. This is where you want to understand why your partner has this sort of view. Is it because maybe they have fears about you being taken away from them and the relationship ending if, opening up could happen? Is it maybe they just are so satisfied with your sex life or your emotional connection that they don't have a desire? Is it maybe they're actually not interested in non monogamy, but they might be interested in you, their partner, exploring non-monogamy, and maybe that was just their reaction for them. So there's so many different ways that it could go. So I would just recommend really getting curious about the reasoning your partner is giving you.
And how would a coach or a therapist such as yourself support like maybe a couple, one side who's exploring it, one side who's no? I guess, do those kind of conversations happen in your office?
All the time.
I guess that's why you're in business, yes. But how do you help them navigate that?
Yeah. And so, one thing that we don't think about is there's so many different types you can practice non monogamy. And so, what often happens is I'll get one partner who is totally on board with swinging, and swinging generally doesn't have an emotional aspect of giving yourself into someone relationally. It's usually just reserved for sexual, fun, short term experiences. Whereas another partner may come in and they want to expand into polyamory, and maybe they want to add a girlfriend or a second wife or another spouse to the mix. And so there, we're working with two different visions of the relationship. And so we have to decide what we want to do about that, what we can't live without. We have to look at what our non negotiables are, and we have to see what we do agree on and what we don't agree on. Sometimes that means that the relationship that comes in does end because they do want two separate things. They have different visions of where they want to take the relationship. Sometimes it means a lot of trial and error with experimenting on different variations of what could work for both of them. So there's no clear cut answer of exactly what to do because it's all a big experiment.
I'm interested, as you were talking about that, I was visioning pornography addiction and someone who may be interested in exploring a different type of relationship, but their partner is giving them the hard no, and they turn to pornography. And for a lot of guys, pornography is a bit of an issue, and it's so accessible these days compared to when we were growing up and it wasn't as accessible. Do you have conversations around pornography and maybe healthy pornography use in your clinic?
Yeah, actually, we don't touch on porn that much. Porn doesn't come up as a topic that much. In terms of like visual pornography, audio pornography, that's not something that the clients usually bring up as a topic of contention between them. However, I have noticed that at times when I'm working with a couple dynamic and they either are monogamous or are or have explored non-monogamy, there can sometimes be with a more anxious partner who's anxious about the relationship, this sense of comparison, knowing that maybe their partner is watching pornography, and maybe that can actually shine a light on a disconnection between the two of them because there's some sort of emotion that's being missed. And so they're not able to communicate, hey, when you watch porn, I feel XYZ, down on myself. I feel unworthy. I am worried that I'm not attractive enough for you. So a lot of times we don't talk about porn for the most part, but I will say it has popped up every now and then as more of an insecurity in one of the partners.
In the work that I do, I hear stories about how pornography is getting quite violent these days. And I guess it plays into that domestic violence or the fantasies of having another partner come in the mix. And it can be really full on. And I was just interested to hear that and interested to hear about the anxiety that pops up in these relationships and how that interplays as well. I guess imagining that we've got two people on maybe different planes or field as well, how do they go about improving maybe the communication in their relationship so that it can maybe blossom into something that is more or is what they're both looking for?
Yeah. And so this applies to all relationship dynamics, not just non monogamy. Things that they can do to improve is stop getting nasty. If you know of Gottman's Four Horsemen, so you're thinking of defensiveness, contempt, criticism, and stonewalling. Those are the four killers of communication in your relationship. So if you are being critical rather than actually just speaking from a place of your own feelings and talking objectively about the situation, defensiveness, actually trying to either switch the subject really quickly so you're deflecting it from yourself or trying to place blame on the other partner when they bring up something in you. Contempt being trying to put yourself down. And so this can look like making your partner not feel as worthy by calling them names. It could be an eye roll. This could be saying things like, "Oh, you're just like your mother," or "I always knew you would do this." Really toxic things. That's when it gets really bad. And then stonewalling. So that is when you're getting into shutting down. This is when you basically come into robot mode and your senses and nervous system is just so overloaded, you're not able to communicate anymore. So those are the things not to do. And we really need to move into reading each other's body cues so that we can learn right when the sign is that something is off. Many people notice when there's a shift in an interaction, but they just, let it bypass and don't really go into it. So let's say you're coming to me and you likely know that there's something that's upsetting me, and you ask me what's going on, and I say, I'm fine. When we both know that I'm not fine. And so, one, that's the person's responsibility who's saying I'm fine to be truthful. We need to open up a really honest place of communication for me to say, you know what? I'm actually feeling really lonely and jealous because you spent 30 minutes extra time on your date today, and I have really been missing you. That lands a lot differently than saying I'm fine and closing up the conversation and then, ignoring it and letting resentment build up. And then on the other side of that is the person who is hearing you say, I'm fine. So the partner who is trying to do that little bit of exploration there. And so noticing that when you say, I'm fine, that there's that shift. There's likely a facial expression that looks a little different. So maybe if they were happy just like a second before you said that, you call that out. Start mirroring for them what you're noticing. Hey, wait a second. I notice you're saying fine, but you feel like you kind of dropped into a lower place right there. I'm getting really worried that maybe there's something you might be afraid of bringing up to me, and I really want to hold a safe space for you. So it's both partners' jobs communicating that you're going to hold safe space for the other to communicate vulnerably.
Yeah, I love how you brought that up. Communication is so important in relationships, and that open. And I loved how you said, "Just don't be nasty." Just put the nastiness away and hear people and hold space for them. I like that how you said holding space. As therapists, that's what we do. We hold space, and we can do that in our own relationships as well. If someone's listening to this and they're like, "Okay, I want to explore this," but they're not sure where to start, where should they start? I mean, we talked about exploring, with podcasts and so forth. Maybe they're past that stage. How would they find a good relationship coach or therapist that they could work with?
Yeah, so I really recommend for therapy, they can go on therapyden.com, and they actually sort by therapists who have a specialty in non monogamy, polyamory. If you are searching online for coaches, I would really recommend actually the Poly Friendly Professionals Directory. And I can give you the link to the actual URL for the show notes for that. But there's a whole directory of professionals who are polyamory affirming. And that's actually not only limited to coaches or therapists. You've got accountants, you've got photographers, you've got lawyers who are affirming and out that they want to help people just like you.
Yeah, we'll grab the web link for that so we can put it in the show notes so people can check that out for themselves. Now, Paige, I could talk about this topic all day. It's really interesting. It's opening my eyes to a whole new world. I do talk about a lot of relationships in my therapy practice. This one hasn't come up, but I'm sure maybe now that I'm aware of it, I might start seeing more signs of it, which is really cool as well. I'm interested, you've also got the Stubborn Love podcast as well. We talked about that at the top of the air, and I'd love to hear you plug a bit of that and share about where the interest to be a podcaster came from and maybe some of the topics that you have on the podcast as well.
Yeah. So I started the Stubborn Love podcast just in the pandemic, like we all did, just to fill my time as a hobby, really. And I was like, ooh, let me learn this new thing and play with the more back end part where I do the editing. And so that kind of just facilitated this creative energy that I wanted to disperse into the world. The whole point of the podcast essentially is talking about just a whole plethora of different relationship topics. And so every episode is dedicated to helping you take away insight or actionable tips to help your relationship. So we have topics from a variety of things. It could be, talking about dating. It could be talking about navigating non-monogamy. It could be talking about your sexual relationship or kink or just almost anything that you can think of. So I have really been enjoying having that podcast. I get to meet great people like you and have other experts really just giving awareness in the world of what their expertise are, but also so that people can find hope and maybe other professionals near them for those issues.
It is really great podcast. Yeah, I love being a guest on your podcast as well. So I'll put in the link as well so people can check out your podcast too. And if you are out there listening and you do it, give Paige a 5-star rating. It's always helpful to do that if you're loving podcasts. So Paige, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find you if they want to work with you or find a bit more about you?
Yeah, if they want to work with me, they can find me on the website at paigebond.com. And I do all kinds of stuff. I'm actually a couple of experts on apps for dating or for premarital work. They can also work with me one-on-one and we can do coaching or take one of my courses or workshops. So I offer all kinds of things. Just hop on my email list and let's see how we can work together.
Yeah, you've got some free resources as well. Do you want to plug the resources?
Yes. So as I specialize in non-monogamy, especially with people pleasers who navigate non-monogamy, I have a people-pleasing workbook that's for free. You can sign up on my website. And I also have a jealousy workbook that's free where you can sign up on my website.
Awesome. We'll put the links into the show notes for that. Now, Paige, we do talk about some big topics on the show, and we always like to leave the episode with something a bit more lighter. And so this is your opportunity to plug something that's making you feel good at the moment. And that could be a podcast you're listening to. It could be a book, a self-care activity, an affirmation, anything that is just lighting you up at the moment.
Oh, this is going to be really random. But I did this last night and it was amazing. So I have color changing lights in my home so I can kind of like change them to whatever kind of vibe I'm feeling. And so last night what I did was hop on YouTube and watch kind of like a lyric video from one of my favorite bands. And they have this really cool background where it's just like this moving picture, almost kind of like a psychedelic feel, which is perfect since I work in the world of psychedelics. And so I matched the color of my lighting in my home to the background of the video I'm watching, and I kind of just melt. And that brought me so much joy last night.
Oh, that's so cool. What's the band? What's the band that you're looking for a song?
Yeah, so the band is called Floor, Flor, and they're just this awesome kind of pop synthy group that I have never listened to one of their songs and ever felt bad. Or if I'm ever going into listening to one of their songs and I'm like in a bad mood, it immediately just turns into just happy, joyful. They're amazing.
Paige, thanks so much for coming on, sharing your expertise into non-monogamy and relationships and communication and all that. Really appreciate you coming on and, sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Simon. Love what you do, and I'm glad to be here. So thanks for having me on.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.